It is now 1 o'clock on today, Tuesday, the 19th of November, and we can commence the Standing Committee meeting on Education, Western Cape Provincial Parliament. I would like to welcome all members and the Minister and all officials who are attending this meeting. I think just by way of introduction, we will just proceed through the members, first of all, just to introduce themselves, and thereafter we will hand over to Minister Mania and the team that will provide the briefing today on the World Bank's sector analysis for education that has been done for the Western Cape. So, as mentioned, I'm Leon van Wyk, the chair of the Standing Committee, and I hand over to colleagues.
Good afternoon, Chair and colleagues, and all the officials and our guests. I am Emery Boyson, and I'm a member of this committee. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairperson, Minister, all honourable members and officials. My name is Wendy Kaiser-Philander, and I'm a member of this committee.
Good afternoon, Chairperson and Minister. Colleagues, my name is Ferland Christians, a member of this committee.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. I'm member Derek Wessels, and I am an alternate on this committee, standing in for Member Walters. Thank you very much.
And other members, Member Stevens, Member Sayed.
Hi, Chairperson. This is Member Khalid Sayed, and I'm a member of this particular committee. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair. I'm Donita Stevens, and I'm a member of this committee.
Thanks very much, committee members, and I would then like to welcome the Honourable Minister David Mania and to this meeting today, and then we can also then do a round of introductions for the team, both from the World Bank and from the Department of Education. Thank you.
Chairperson, is it only on my side?
I think I'm not hearing you, Minister Mania. Sound issue.
Chair, I think there seems to be a connectivity.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was just struggling with connectivity. I do apologise to you and to members of the committee. I'm David Mania, Minister of Education in the Western Cape, and I am joined by a team from the department and from the World Bank, who I'm sure will introduce themselves. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairperson, honourable members, Minister Mania. Good afternoon. My name is Salih Abrahams. I'm the Deputy Director General for Education Planning at the WCED. I will be supporting and briefing the committee this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Nynan. I'm the Program Leader for Human Development at the World Bank, and I'm based in Johannesburg. Thank you for the opportunity to present this report today.
Thank you very much to Honourable Minister, to Mr. Abrahams and Ms. Nynan. I think we can probably proceed directly into the briefing, and I think if we could, I'm not sure, Minister, if you were going to do a brief introduction before handing over. Certainly from a committee perspective, we're looking forward to this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good afternoon to you and good afternoon to the members. I mean, I really do welcome this opportunity to present the education sector analysis, which of course was conducted with the World Bank for the Western Cape. It really is, I think, a first of its kind analysis, which I think is going to go a long way to supporting our department to set long-term priorities, particularly so that we can improve our learning outcomes and also, of course, expand access to education in our province. And I'm delighted that Liz Neenan has found time in her very packed diary to join us this afternoon to jointly present the report. I do think it's also appropriate, Chairperson, to say, and I'm sure that all the members of the committee are aware of this, that this has been a very sad day for education with a learner who was killed earlier this morning in what appears to be a gang-related shooting. And I'm sure that members of the committee join me in extending condolences, obviously, to the learner's family, but also to the school community. Thank you. And with that, Chair, I'm happy to hand over to the Sally Abrahams and Liz to take us through the presentation.
Thank you very much, Minister, and through the Chair. If I may then proceed to sharing the presentation this afternoon. It's a presentation that I will deliver jointly with Ms. Neenan. I'll just bring that up, Chair, and I'll ask the Secretariat if the presentation is visible and that the audio is acceptable at this stage.
Yes, it's certainly everything's good.
Well, good afternoon again to the honourable members and the committee. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a briefing and provide some insights into what has emerged as a report issued by the World Bank, but it has been an exercise done in collaboration with the Western Cape Education Department with a distinct objective of providing a comprehensive view of the sector in the province. And that view, of course, has been a part of a research process. It's a consultative process. My job this afternoon, as I move on to, I'm just having my slide just pause, Chair. I'll just move it along.
So it seems to be Tuesday, so that's probably the day that we have glitches. Okay.
I think it will move along now, sir. So the World Bank report is accessible at multiple locations. It is a report that was launched on the 17th of September after 16 or 17 months of work that had commenced in February of 2023. At the request of the Western Cape Government via the National Treasury, we had engaged the World Bank on this engagement with the distinct purpose of delivering practical insights and also recommendations that we could take forward as we engage the dual challenge of improving learning outcomes and indeed expanding access to quality learning opportunities. Chair, I share the link. These electronic links point to both the World Bank website as well as the WCD's website, and we will make the report in its detail accessible at various other locations as well. My role this afternoon is to deliver the first part of a two-part presentation. I intend to share with the committee the objectives and the rationale for conducting an education sector analysis in the province, and also use as a backdrop the assessment of the state of the education sector, reflecting just briefly in its setup on the global state of learning, as we look across performances for different education systems internationally, provide some perspective, comparative perspective on education outcomes in other countries, nationally in the African context, and regionally, and then also nationally, the context around the Western Cape's performance side by side, looking at the performance of other provinces as well. And this baseline assessment will inform, as the Minister outlined, the preparation of targeted strategies and investments that we plan to make into the education sector as we embark on what has been a bold new education agenda in the province. My colleague, Program Leader for Human Development in Southern Africa for the World Bank, Elizabeth Nynan, will deliver, in essence, the key recommendations that emerged from the analysis and expand on the global and the local evidence that had been reflected upon as the team surfaced improvement actions and strategies to improve learning. Our commitment, Chair, remains to deliver quality education for every learner in the province. We are committed to both equity and excellence in education, and what that means practically is that every child should have and will have access to quality learning opportunities. Our central goal as it emerges is to ensure that we do deliver better learning outcomes for children in the province, and we acknowledge the sheer scale of that particular challenge and have engaged the thought leadership and the research capacity at an international level to be able to inform our progress and our plans going forward. Our mission, similarly, is to ensure that every child who has access to those learning opportunities are supported in an equitable manner. We know that the pandemic has had a devastating impact on learning, not just in the province or in the country, but also internationally. And so we had taken action already at the start of this research analysis process to take some immediate actions on things we knew we need to get done. That included, of course, reversing the learning losses that through our systemic tests we had identified were prevalent. And so whilst we've had initial feedback and indications of positive results on those attempts to reverse learning losses, we know that there's still much to do. And of course, we had embarked on a program to rapidly expand access to many more learners. And so those two actions were in flight when this research project started at the start of 2023 and builds on that as we put the learning agenda front and center of what we do. The objectives of this sector analysis, therefore, is to provide a comprehensive picture of the education sector. It will help to identify technical assistance. It will help to identify further resource inputs that might be required in the education department, in the system, in the province. And ultimately, as we identify those key priorities, this is effectively prioritize the actions and the reforms that we need to embark on in a way that it maximizes the impact as regards improving access, quality and equity in the system. Our focus has been on access, will continue to be on access in this province. Quality, the key distinction I'd like to make is that this is not an academic paper. This has been an attempt to produce actionable strategies that prioritizes improving learning outcomes. And we haven't shied away from looking at the efficiency of spend in the province when it comes to education. We looked at the quantum of spend into education at the national level and compare that to other comparator countries, but we've also looked under the hood in terms of the efficiency of spending and areas where we believe we need to target in order to generate that bigger impact towards building a more resilient and effective education system. The report that has culminated in its graphic is shown on the right-hand side. Chair, in setting up this research effort, we acknowledge our first of our two challenges, that this is a rapidly expanding system, the one in the Western Cape Education Department. In addition to improving learning, we know that the pressure to expand access, particularly at the secondary school level, will continue for the remainder of this decade. The data you see on this graph is the annual growth rate average. This is data from the National Department of Education that shows very clearly over the period 2019 to 2023 that the rate of growth, and this would be new learners, net new learners in the system, had grown most significantly in the Western Cape and in the Gauteng province, as shown on the left-hand side for all schools, but particularly for secondary school learners, grades 8 to 12. The 4.2% average growth rate is almost double what we've seen year on year in the last decade. And so that is quite significant. It is expected to taper off 2025 through to 2030, but it will be in excess of 2.5% nevertheless. It will be right up there with Gauteng as the fastest growing education system in the country. And so we look at those particular challenges of expanding access and expanding access to quality in the secondary school environment, which incidentally, Chair and Committee, growth is defined both by the changes to population, so age group population in the Western Cape needing access to schooling, but also as learners are retained in the system. We see higher levels of attainment and lower levels of dropout, particularly in the Western Cape, and so that informs the net number of learners we anticipate that we need to accommodate. The analysis builds on research. It's not done in isolation and in a vacuum. We have acknowledged previously the deep research capacity we have in South Africa. We have acknowledged and have thought to add value to the benchmark tests that South Africa and the various provinces participate in by equally making our systemic test data in the Western Cape accessible to researchers. And so this particular analytical work builds on the data we've accumulated looking at the international benchmark tests, our own systemic tests, and then more recent work done at the national level, looking at teacher demographics and the changes to be anticipated over the next decade or so. And of course, more recently, the 2030 strategy for early childhood development. These are data sets that would have been factored into the analysis. But Chair, I think the second part of my brief setup of this particular piece of work is to reflect on the state of global learning poverty at the time that this research was done. We acknowledge that there was a learning crisis, a deep one that had existed pre-COVID, looking at learning levels. The term learning poverty is a metric that refers to the share of children who cannot read a simple text by age 10, the standardized comparison of educational outcomes have found its form in various ways. The most often used one is the one that assesses the levels of reading competencies for a grade 4 child, a 10-year-old child. And so we look at that data in comparison to other countries and reflect that as a relationship to the expenditure that government puts into education. And as we can see on this particular graphic, that through COVID and post-COVID, we had seen a surge of up to 70% of learning poverty in low and middle income countries and almost as high as 86% for sub-Saharan Africa. And what that means effectively, Chair, is that that statistic is translated into reading ability. And so we would have seen in the public domain and elsewhere, the statistic for South Africa most recently in 2021 was that 19% of South African grade 4s or 10-year-olds could read for meaning. In other words, 81% could not show the basic competencies. And so we look at how South Africa is performing in terms of learning outcomes in relation to the amount of funding going into the country's education systems. We were, of course, focused on the Western Cape. And whilst we had seen that the Western Cape in relative terms was able to maintain its average scores, only seeing fairly minimal declines from the 2016 writing of that PIRLS test, which is the Progress in International Reading Literacy Study. which measures the reading achievement, as I said, at the 4th grade. The score on the left-hand side in the left graphic, tapering down from 377 in the Western Cape to 2021 score of 363. It is still below the threshold, which I indicate in the graphic on the right-hand side, the minimum threshold, the low international benchmark of scores that is indicative of the minimum competencies of reading to be shown is 400. So the 363, whilst it is in relative terms the highest score in the country relative to other provinces, those learning outcomes, those levels are still low. And of course, the pandemic had effectively wiped out the years of gains that we would have seen in the decade prior, but it does still mean that there's much work to do, and our futures of our youngest learners are at risk at this stage. It is important that we reflect on the relative performance in terms of learning outcomes by appropriately comparing children who find themselves in a similar socioeconomic context. And so, whilst I reflected just briefly on the Western Cape score, which is, as we can see there, Chair, 31 points decline for the South African in the middle of the first graphic on the left-hand side. South Africa's score in the PIRLS test by 2021 had declined by 32 points. The Western Cape score sits positively as an outlier against the South African scores, but I've also used to indicate the Western Cape score relative to peers in countries where we find equal socioeconomic context, and I've used Brazil as an example. And in terms of a relevant international comparison, Brazil has, of course, roughly the same GDP per capita at around $7,000 per capita. But on the basis of the standardized outcomes that we see, effectively the translation of these scores, Chair, means that the average Brazilian grade 4 child at 10 years old is effectively 3.3 years of learning ahead of the average South African grade 4 child. The way that's calculated typically is a 40-point score is typically 1 year of additional learning. And so the 120 points or thereabouts that separates, 130 points that separates Brazil and South Africa gives context to that definition of the gap between the learning levels for a typical or average Brazilian child and one in South Africa. And so we use that context to look at and characterize learning levels in South Africa. And looking through that lens of measuring reading achievement, on the right-hand side, the comparison of the Western Cape score in 2021, the reverse of that 62% bottom bar is that 38% has shown that of our learners have shown to be able to meet the minimum benchmark, and that 38% compares to the 2 bars on the left-hand side to the 81%, as I've said, 81% in the South African context, children at age 10 not being able to meet the low benchmark of 400 points. Our learning levels are therefore considered to be fragile. It's considered to be susceptible to shocks. The pandemic, which had disrupted schooling for many children, have shown that we need to find strategies that sustains learning and shows resilience in the way that we protect learning. These are big challenges that lie ahead in the way that we design our programs going forward. Second to last slide, as we contextualize the learning levels, which is the primary focus of this research analysis, we looked across the spectrum. One of the dimensions as we assess learning levels at the very early stages of the learning trajectory of the learning pipeline at the early learning level, we find that 53% and 29% of our children, as measured through the early learning programs for 4- and 5-year-olds, are not able to meet the milestone levels as assessed by various research processes. The Thrive by 5 Index is one of those processes that assesses cognitive development for 4- and 5-year-olds and in the ECD space. And so we are concerned about the number of children who off the bat start off school with big deficits. And the challenge, of course, is that if those deficits aren't curtailed and improved at the foundation level, the challenge becomes immeasurably harder for children as they progress through the system and makes the teacher's job at the intermediate level very difficult. On the right-hand side, building on our systemic tests, we know there's a long tail of underachievement. We do need to move more of the bulk of those learners, of course, to the right-hand side in terms of being able to meet the pass requirements, the 50% pass requirements of our systemic tests. So the majority of learners, as we know now and as we've compared, are not at the levels expected in relation to their peers around the region and around the world. And we have resolved to be able to set targets that would put children in better comparison to those particular peers. Our initial efforts to recover learning losses have shown positive results, Chair, but the key systemic challenge that we find ourselves engaged on right now, post-COVID, is that the learning ability in classrooms, in schools, and between schools are getting larger. And so it's not just appropriate to compare learning levels between school A and school B. What we're finding now is that the learning abilities vary to a greater extent in that school and in that classroom, and that makes teaching a very difficult job. And so we had wanted to engage practical insights of what other countries would have been doing to be able to deal with and engage learners effectively that are different learning abilities in the same classroom. And we've got some statistical data in the province, but also that we've gleaned on nationally that shows the differences between learners in the same grade 3 classroom, where we think the variance needs to be engaged more precisely and be able to support the teacher to do that. So teaching in public schools in the Western Cape is and will increasingly become highly challenging because of that reason, that the learning ability for learners varies to the extent that it does. As I prepare to hand over to Liz to share the key recommendations, Chair, it leaves me to say that it is important also to acknowledge the key features of the Western Cape Education Department system that had been illuminated by this World Bank analysis and report, in which it acknowledges that the province's progress with measuring learning performance annually through the systemic test has been almost a unique advantage, firstly, in the South African context, but it has enabled us to definitively identify the key areas of challenge, and has allowed us to target improvements and tracking of impacts of our learning and other reading strategies. So great data is available, but needs to be put to more productive use. We can also be proud of the additional subsidies and the support that is given to learners from households and communities that have high levels of deprivation, above and beyond, I should add, what is required by national policy. And so this additional funding to poorer learners do play a significant role and contributes to getting learners to school and keeping them in school, keeping them effectively engaged and minimizing the dropout rate. And then, of course, an acknowledgement around the targeted programs that the province have moved forward with to firstly recover learning losses, of course, with its Back on Track program, but the other pioneering reforms around accelerating infrastructure builds and indeed piloting of new policies around school types and particularly around pursuing hybrid learning or electronic or digital intermediated learning. And so in summary, Chair, as I hand over, we are encouraged by the progress with getting children into school with those additional funding allocations. But the logical step, of course, is whilst we are committed to spending the monies efficiently and effectively to supporting learning, there's more work that we can do. So children are now in greater numbers in school. We're attracting and expanding access and doing so efficiently through not just the infrastructure bills, but other financial allocations. We know, of course, from the General Household Survey, which is what that GHS acronym is for, that the number one reason that our learners say they are not in school is due to the high costs of schooling in the Western Cape. And so we've taken those costs off, and, you know, through those fee exemptions, the subsidies, etc., have contributed to ensuring that there's more equity in the system, and we can actually support children who are not able to cover those costs themselves. We know, of course, now that the logical next step as we improved access is to continue to focus on improving learning. So in summary, key drivers for us, and what I'd like to certainly set as an expectation that we will be more visible on as we're going forward, is what are those priority policy actions and reforms that have emerged from this research analysis. They will then take those policy actions as proposals, will take center stage in our recommendations as we build our 5-year plans going forward. The practical actionable strategies that have come from this is not a document that will go into the top drawer. This is a document that will be used for its practical insights around, and potentially again also show out where, you know, where things work or where interventions have worked elsewhere, what can we learn from them, and what can we replicate and scale, which is going to be our defining challenge. What matters for economic growth, Chair, as we know, is less the years of education completed, but rather the knowledge and the skills that learners acquire while in school. And with that, I'd like to hand over to, with your permission, Chair, to Ms. Nanan to talk to the main recommendations from this particular report. Thank you very much. Liz?
Thanks so much, Sally, and good afternoon again to everybody. Before I delve into the recommendations, I do want to say that, you know, I've worked on several education sector analysis across the region and beyond, and this was one of the most enjoyable ones and rewarding ones to work on for many reasons. One is we had the leadership of the ministry that was really engaged, from Minister Mainier, Sally, who was really my counterpart, taking forward this work, really to understand and get into the depth of the analysis, and of course on the recommendations. We don't always have that in all the countries we work in, and it's a sign of a group that is willing to look at how they're performing and wanting to improve the work that they're doing. The other important part was, as Sally mentioned, you know, data is always an issue in many countries that we work with. In Western Cape, we had almost the opposite problem. It's a lot of data in Western Cape. It is the only province that has learning assessment data on an annual basis. So trying to parse out what we're going to use and use it to tell a story of how to improve on learning. And then just to say, you know, there was also this huge team behind WCED that worked with the World Bank on a daily basis to really pull together these recommendations that we think are feasible, and that they were also recommendations that were classified as short-term recommendations that maybe have less of a fiscal impact versus medium to long-term interventions, which probably need additional funding. We also worked with Stellenbosch University. As Sally said, there's no shortage of research in South Africa, and really trying to draw on what was already there. So just wanted to say that, and I think this standing committee meeting of in Western Cape really shows the interest of the province to push ahead on this work. So thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to present. So on the main recommendations, there are really 4 different buckets of interventions and actions that we recommended from this, from all of the analysis that you showed, that Sally showed. And just to say that these recommendations aren't mutually exclusive, as you'll see. You know, improving foundations of learning needs a strong teacher core that's effective in the classroom, and innovative reforms can support improvements in foundations of learning. But we thought to separate them, to think about the focus of each of them, but also to keep in mind that these are very related issues. Better data, research, and monitoring capacity will help to strengthen teacher effectiveness, will help to evaluate and monitor education reforms to see what needs to be taken to scale and will help to improve foundations of learning. So I'm going to go into some of these in detail in the presentation, and I hope it entices you to read the report. And I'm not going to go through everything, but the details are in the report around the specific recommendations. Sally, if you could move to the next slide, please. So we do build on the global and local research and knowledge. And the first area that we talked about was improving the foundations of learning. So why do we want to improve foundations of learning, right, compared to improving matric pass rates, for example? And we can really think about 4 different reasons. One is that children who start with weaker skills in school then tend to lose ground in relative terms to students who start off at a better level. So while you all might be progressing, those who start off weaker tend to lose out more. So it's really important to make sure that everybody is starting on an adequate footing and that we don't leave anybody behind. That's the first reason, and we see this effect across countries, right? If you start early, give everybody the base that they need and the foundations, learning is cumulative and they'll be able to progress better in later years. That comes to the second point around this relationship between the quality of learning and repetition. We know that there's a very strong correlation. So if you're not learning in class, you're more likely to repeat, and that has an impact on the fiscus, right? So the per child cost increases if the quality is, if students are repeating, and we know that repetition, one of the big factors that affects repetition is quality. So there's gains to be made just in terms of budget. By improving quality, you're going to reduce the repetition. And then the third area is that, well, we know from a lot of global evidence, and this is the great part in South Africa, is that there's a lot of evidence in South Africa around what to do to improve foundations of learning. So that's, again, another reason to focus at this level as opposed to other levels. And then the fourth area is that it is the easiest educational improvement from which you can generalize these results to later years or to other subjects. And we'll come to the idea of structured pedagogy to improve foundations of learning. And when we talk about foundations of learning, we're talking about ECD all the way in through grade 1 to grade 4. So we know from a lot of great evidence what to do to improve reading levels, mathematics levels in grade 1 to grade 4. And a lot of the factors that go into improving foundations, such as more effective teachers, coaching of teachers in classrooms to support students at a very personalized level, very tight, strong sequence lesson plans, very strong focus on assessments so that you're monitoring how kids are doing and then be able to provide any kind of remediation as needed. All of these factors that go into a structured pedagogy program to improve foundations are some things that will be useful in other subjects and probably in higher grades as well. So improving early grade literacy and numeracy in Western Cape, the 3 big messages we have over here is focus on those structured pedagogical approaches with teachers at the center of the instructional core. And when we say instructional core, we really talk about what's happening in the classroom. So what's that interaction between teachers, students, and the curriculum in the classroom? So focusing in the classroom to support children and really using teachers more effectively at that level. And I'll talk about this a little bit more, is around that there's a lot of research out there in South Africa around early grade reading and mathematics programs, but many of them have not gone to scale. And then the third part of it is set ambitious targets to improve literacy and numeracy at age 10. So you can actively track how you're doing, but then you'll be able to make changes if needed in order to reach your target. So set a target and move in that direction. Next slide, please, Sally. As I said, we talk a lot about foundations in the report, starting with ECD and then moving into early grades, being grade 1 to grade 4, but ECD, everything from grade R and pre-grade R, starting from the birth of a child, is going to be important. So I encourage you to look at the report around aspects that we talk about related to ECD, because that's an important part of strengthening foundations. And just a few things to mention is that ECD needs to be well coordinated through multiple ministries. It's not just, while Department of Education has the mandate for coordination of ECD, one of the most important time periods for a child is those first 1,000 days. And those first 1,000 days really sit under the mandate of the Department of Health. So working closely between Department of Education, Department of Health, and then of course there's the opportunities through the Child Support Grant, through Department of Social Development. So just to say, ECD is a multi-sectoral and multi-ministerial focus to push forward on. So I want to go to some examples on evidence from other countries that have improved foundations of learning. So improved around grade 1 to grade 4. And these are just two examples. I'm maybe going to focus on the Brazil example rather than the Mississippi one, but you'll see the write-up in the report for Mississippi. The Brazil example comes from the municipality of Sobral. So Sobral is a municipality in the state of Ceará. Ceará is in the northeastern part of Brazil. It is the 5th poorest state in Brazil. As you know, Brazil has huge inequalities, very similar to South Africa, and this is one of the poorest provinces in Brazil. The story of Sobral, so that's the green line on there, is actually way before 2005. It starts in 1997 under the then mayor Cid Gomes, who thought that education was just appalling in the municipality, and he wanted to do something to improve learning of students. And at the time in 1997, he thought that there were two factors that would help to improve learning in schools. One is he felt that teachers should be hired meritocratically. So he went through a huge licensing program to make sure that all teachers had the right abilities to be able to teach. There were more than 1,000 teachers let go in the system, new teachers hired. So really pushing this meritocracy, because he felt that if you have a meritocracy, you're going to have the best teachers. And then the second thing he did in 1987 was he said we need to improve the quality of the schools itself in terms of teaching and learning environment. So improves the inputs that are going into schools, improve school infrastructure, and make sure that schools are safe places, are places where teachers want to go and teach in, but also that they have the inputs that they need. So that was the first 3 years of the program. And by 2000, when the Department of Education and the municipality of Sobral did an assessment of student learning, they found that 60% of students in grade 2 and 20% of students in grade 4 couldn't read. So things aren't getting a lot better, but what did improve was enrollment improved in schools, and you had better infrastructure in schools, right? So at least at that point, because infrastructure is improving, parents are feeling like they want to send their kids to school, and that was the change that happened in that period. So then the mayor was Gomez again at the time, and in 2000 he decided, well, how do I make sure that I get kids to learn how to read? And the period of 2001 to 2004, he focused on three things. One is biannual examinations of students to find out where they are. And these were external examinations to test students on their reading ability. And then the second was he made sure that principals of schools were meritocratically hired and placed in schools. So he started to acknowledge that it's not just the teachers, it's also the leadership of schools that matters for learning. And then the third thing he did was to revise the teaching and learning materials to make sure that teachers are provided with the tools that they need to support students in classrooms. So that's a 3-year period. And at the end of 3 years, they had remarkable improvement. At the end of 3 years, 89% of grade 2s and 92% of grade 3s could read. So you see the huge shift in a 3-year period on learning. And that really comes down to better teaching and learning materials, support for teachers, better assessment to make sure that we're on target, and better leadership in the schools. What you see in this graphic was in 2005, there was an education quality index that was set up across Brazil. And in 2005, even though Sobral was doing pretty well compared to where they were in 1997, across municipalities, these 5,500 municipalities in Brazil, Sobral ranked 1,366. So very low down on the scale in terms of educational performance. But don't forget, Gomez was still over there. They still had a big leadership shift towards educational improvement. And what you can see over there was that the educational improvements that they started to see in the foundational years translated across basic education. And you can see that this constant focus on assessment, on teaching and learning in the classroom led to a dramatic rise of Sobral on the Educational Quality Index. And by 2017, Sobral was #1 of all of the municipalities in Brazil. And you'll see that the state of Ceará from 2013 also started to try to see, well, what is Sobral doing that's making this change and how can we improve? And that's where you can also start to see the state of Ceará also starting to improve. Very similar story in Mississippi with very strong leadership around saying that you cannot move past grade 3 unless you have the foundations for reading. And then it sets things in motion, which is very similar around making sure you have assessments regularly, making sure you set targets, making sure that teachers are provided with the tools they need to support students, making sure that school management is supportive and driving forward on these improvements. Next slide, please, Sally. So in South Africa on early grade reading, this is just a graphic which shows the different early grade reading programs in South Africa. So you don't need to go to Sobral or Mississippi or Kenya to see what an early grade reading program is. You have several in South Africa. We mapped out about 24 different programs. But all of these different programs are not necessarily all structured pedagogy programs. They are some structured pedagogy programs like Funda Wande, the early grade reading study. But the main point about this is while there are several early grade reading programs in South Africa, not all of them have been evaluated. And all of them are either small to medium scale in South Africa, and the lessons have not been integrated into the everyday processes and activities of the Department of Education. So we haven't scaled up early grade reading programs across locations. nor has it just the lessons from what we've learned become just the way we do things in education. So there's a real opportunity to learn from it, but also to try and have better efficiencies in the system, because you have so many different programs that are running in parallel and not being assessed as a whole to see where to move the needle in terms of improvements. Next slide, please, Sally. So I'm going to move to the second area of the recommendations. The second bucket had to do with teachers. And you'll see that we have 4 entry points of improving this instructional core. The instructional core, as I mentioned, is the teacher, the student, curriculum in the classroom. Of course, there's also student school level leadership that supports teachers in the classroom, and all of that is part of that instructional core. The 4 entry points we talk about in the report is that there will be a new teacher pipeline in Western Cape and in South Africa as a whole. In 2021, according to the teacher demographic study that University of Stellenbosch is currently leading, it was estimated that 42% of all educators and 73% of senior educators were over the age of 50. So that means they're not far from retirement. So we're talking about 40% of the teaching core that is not far from retirement. And those that are younger than 50, you actually see quite a bit of turnover. So we see the rate of resignations of teachers that are below the age of 50 at about 6%. So there's clearly a new core of teachers that are going to come into the system, and a new pipeline of teachers that can be supported to be more effective in the classroom. The one part of it is initial teacher education and what happens in universities and what's being taught in universities. And the call there is really to make training at the university level, initial teacher education, more practical and more based in the classroom rather than theory. That, of course, requires that the Department of Basic Education is talking to the Department of Higher Education and Training. But there's also an opportunity, and this is where we feel that the WCED has an opportunity, is once the teacher comes into the classroom, there's an onboarding process of supporting teachers in the classroom. And the Cape Teaching and Learning Institution does a lot of work in this area around onboarding of teachers, but also continuous professional development of teachers. So thinking about how teachers can be supported in the classroom and working with the CTLI on this area. The second is improving the conditions for teachers in school. And this refers really to the few schools in Western Cape and beyond, which are overcrowded, that have poor conditions of work in terms of infrastructure, in terms of availability of materials, but also just in terms of overcrowded classrooms. The third area I want to talk about a little bit more is around teacher effectiveness. And when it comes to performance management has really been a very top-down process in Western Cape and in South Africa overall, and that's worked up to now. But to really push the boundaries around improving learning, we have to tap into that intrinsic motivation of teachers. So the report talks about how to elevate performance management by really trying to tap into some of the intrinsic motivation of teachers around support for teachers through different professional groups or through working with other teachers through lesson planning or others. Next slide, please, Sally. I want to talk a little bit more about teacher effectiveness. Sally touched on this earlier. The fact of the matter is that teachers are doing very, very challenging work in their classrooms. And this graphic essentially says that 90%, so 90% of public primary schools, in 90% of public primary schools in Western Cape, the difference in scores between the top third of students and the bottom third of students in grade 3 mathematics was over 52 percentage points. So that's a 1.5% standard deviation difference between the top third and the bottom third. So you're talking about kids with very varying abilities in the classroom, and this is the same that we see for reading, and it's the same that we see this sort of big difference between the top performance and the bottom performance in grade 6 and in grade 9. So teachers have a very challenging work that they have to do to try and address the individual needs of students. And we've seen through various programs how teachers can be supported to support kids in the classroom at a very personalized level. Teaching at the right level is one of the tools that have been used in India to really get to personalized learning for students. And here, the focus of the report is that we need to, when we think about continuous professional development of teachers, it's not so much what teachers should be teaching. There is going to be that, because there's going to be very structured lessons plans that you provide to teachers, but it's more around how to teach in the classroom, right? So when there was an assessment done of teachers through the TIMSS survey a few years ago, it wasn't really, teachers didn't have as much desire around content, curriculum, and assessment. It was more around, how do I do personalized learning for a learner in my class? How do I make sure that they get to higher level order skills? How can I integrate technology into the classroom? So that could be hopefully the focus going forward, to be able to enable teachers to be able to teach in classroom and really giving them the tools that they need to support them in classroom. Next slide, please, Sally. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. I think that there's enough evidence from South Africa on how to deal with early grade reading and how to improve early grade reading. There's many models of professional fraternities in South Africa that could be leveraged. So building on South African evidence, drawing on international experience, there really is enough out there to design a program that will hopefully lead to improvements, and it can be done, as we see in Brazil, in a short time period. But it's really around making sure that those targets are set, that teachers are supported, that school management buys into it, principals are on board, parents are on board, and we can get the ship moving in the direction to improve foundations. Next slide, please, Sally. So this is just a little bit more of some of the details of the actions in the priority areas. As I mentioned, in the green are the 4 big priority areas of focus under foundations of learning. It's really around improving services in the first 1,000 days, improving access to ECD services for children aged 3 to 6, and you'll see a lot of details around improving access, but also around improving quality. And then the third part is really what we've been talking about around improving literacy and numeracy by age 10. Around strengthening teacher effectiveness in classroom, I talked about the 4 areas. And the third priority area I didn't talk much about, but I think Western Cape is doing a lot of innovative reforms around public-private partnerships. Just to give you one statistic on this, that 60% of independent schools in Western Cape actually target schools in areas that are classified as quintile 1 and 2. So these are not independent schools serving the wealthiest learners. 60% are serving some of the poorest learners. And there's an opportunity over there to build on partnerships with private providers, make sure that there's good, well-structured contracts, improve their autonomy, but strengthen their accountability in terms of results, in terms of improvements in learning. There's a lot of good examples of blended teaching and learning programs in Western Cape. Apex was one that we featured in the report. And then, of course, the rapid school build model, which Western Cape has really been, I think, a star around how quickly they've been able to construct schools last year. And I can't remember the number of days, but it was shocking for all of us at the World Bank who work on many large school construction programs worldwide. And Western Cape really has made a lot of progress, and I think a lot for the rest of the world to learn from as well, from Western Cape. Investing in better data collection, research, monitoring, and evaluation capacity. I said at the beginning that Western Cape has a lot of data available, but how it uses that data to effectively improve teaching and learning, how it uses that data to make determinations around what should we scale up, what should we be investing in, and how it uses that data to support teachers and students in the classroom is going to be key going forward. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. All of this is going to require more efficient spending. We are in the period of a fiscal crisis in South Africa, a lot of fiscal consolidation, and National Treasury is talking about better spending of the funds that are out there. So how can spending in education be more efficient? But also there will be a need for additional funding, particularly for things like early childhood development, which is very underfunded across South Africa, public-private partnerships, and the expansion of secondary education. Strengthening research capacity and regulatory capacity of the WCED, research capacity in terms of how to use the data more effectively, but also regulatory capacity if the expansion to other private providers of education comes into the fold. How can WCED take its role as a custodian for education and make sure that they're able to regulate more effectively? Better targeting of resources to those who are falling behind. I think the Back on Track program is an excellent example of how Western Cape has been able to target resources to those who are falling behind, and how can that be sustained going forward. Sharing lessons between providers and resources, potentially between the different providers of education. There's so many good examples in Western Cape and beyond. Testing innovations, institutionalizing them, exploring new ways to support teachers, and encouraging strong leadership in schools to build this culture of learning. So set your target, go and implement, assess, iterate, make changes, and stay on track to meet those targets. And lastly, is that all of this, while we can see gains in foundational learning quite quickly, if you put in the right program and you implement it with integrity, overall, if we think about 12 years of schooling, it is a long-term commitment, and it needs patience, it needs persistence, and this longer-term commitment. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you very much to you, Liz Nynan, in your presentation, and also to Sali Abrams in sketching the lead in to all of these recommendations that we now have. I think this is absolutely outstanding work that has been done. And right now, I would also like to thank Liz and the World Bank team for the work that they have done and for being with us today to be able to communicate this report to the committee. So that is highly, highly appreciated. I also just want to express on behalf of the committee our condolences to the family of the learner who lost his life today at school. I mean, that is extremely tragic, and it is something that we do not want to see happening, and certainly a worrying factor in terms of the safety, which is also something that is looked at on an ongoing basis by the department. I would like to open up for any comments or questions by members of the committee that that we can perhaps just understand a little bit more on this fairly broad-ranging briefing that we have had. I must say I've been working through their document, the actual report, and certainly what has been done to us now in an hour is really condensing down all of that very deep information and deep work that sits within the report as such. I want to just reflect back to the launch of this report that you did at Wesco's offices, and the comment that was then made by the MC for the day. He made the comment on the number of pages of references that you have at the back of the report, which just is indicative of how much work went in there. So thank you very much. I see Honourable Christians has his hand up, and I'm not sure if there are any others who are ready to follow, but handing over to you, Honourable Christians.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the comprehensive report. It's quite a lengthy, and you can see it's a very, very good report. Of course, a person will have to monitor this over a period of time and also sit down and really get to grips with the report, because a lot of research has been done. And I've just got 2 or 3 questions, but thank you for the I think it's an excellent report. And also, Mr. Abrahams from the World Bank, they said, the data and all of those type of things, you are really, top notch. So you must really thank the HOD and the minister and so on, because you've really, put your shoulder to the wheel, because you want to see a better education system in the Western Cape. So a couple of questions, just this for me is a major problem. The major problem that I have is, as Ms. Ninan said, and you see people, when children go to school and they go to grade R, even if they go to ECDs, they come from a different basis level of understanding, because what's happening at home. Not all parents are educated, cannot even help with basic stuff. So you're going to have that unequal balance all the time. So it means that your ECDs must be so equipped to try to bring them on par, learners, the peers on par. So my question to the WCED is, first, how do you going to get that right, knowing that we have dysfunctional families, child-headed households, single mothers, and all of that. So that child already coming from a impoverished background, don't have the necessary attention, and maybe, a lot of other factors. So I'm just saying, when you look at now that the education department has the ECDs, what is your plan to make sure that when they go into grade R and grade 1, that at least they are on par, and trying to get them, so when they get into the system, that they don't fall behind? I think that was also, Ms. Ninan, your concern, the basis that they start from. It's unequal. So you're always going to have that problem when children gets into the education system. The other thing, so that I think it's a major concern, and like you said, it's just not education. It's more of a whole of society approach to get to that. We can't just say it's education. We'll have to look at other areas. And as you said, your health plays a problem, education tries to help when it comes to nutrition, comes to all of those type of things. So we know all of that. The other question is, you know, when I saw this report first, when it came out, the headlines was Western Cape pupils at poorer schools score lower at tests. So that World Bank report. So that is the first time I saw it. And I've mentioned that in the House as well when we were in sitting. So what it tells me, if I look at the headline, and I mean, you've given all the examples, you looked at Brazil and the fabulous work being done. I'm taking note of all of that. But we must face not in the Western Cape alone, but in the country as a whole, that poorer schools are still underperforming. And Mr. Sadi, maybe you can explain. If we go to, I've mentioned this, if you go to Mitchell's Plain, all right, or you go to Elsie's River, there's certain schools that does excellent. You can't understand that a school down the road has got very bad results, and the school up the road, and I spoke about the headmasters, the principals, but here it says, you know, the teacher with the curriculum and grooming those teachers and having the conditions that they need to teach in. You need to look at that as well. Now, if you look at where teachers, it's very difficult sometimes to get to school because of gang violence and shooting and the areas they are being taught in. So that for me, you know, if I'm a school teacher, I must prepare my class for today, but to get to school is another matter. And in school, we have a safety problem, you know, children even, you know, we visited the school not so long ago. When we walk up the staircase, you can see the little packets being thrown on the staircase, you know, drugs and those type of. So I don't know. So that safety of our educators is also for me a big problem. We always talk about the learners, Mr. Sali, you know, getting to school. But this time I want to focus on the teachers, you know, preparing and having that difficult circumstances. A lady in Mitchell's Plain took early retirement or something last year. When I spoke to her, she was teaching in Mitchell's Plain. She said, I can't. You know, I stay in Rondebosch East. I'm okay, but I can't travel to Mitchell's Plain because I don't know if I'm going to be safe there or while I'm at school. So it's a big problem. So I'm just saying all of that. We don't have all the solutions, but I'm just saying, you know, I see all the plans and all of that. And education, your primary responsibility is to educate. But now you need to have feeding, scholar transport, safety, and all of those type of things. So I don't know. I'm just mentioning that because I'm very concerned with our teachers, and losing good teachers for me is a major, major problem because you don't, and losing excellent principals for me is a major problem. The last, and I know I'm saying a lot, but you know, I was very thrilled with this report, but and like I said, and the story of Sobral in Brazil for me is it's a story that we can sing and talk about and so on. And I know the committee in COVID period were in Brazil, the education were there, but maybe, you know, we must maybe just look at, you know, with everything happening in Brazil, and you know, and they still striving. Maybe best practices is going to help, and maybe that international studies is going to help taking and propelling us forward. But yet again, you know, we'll have to learn. I don't think the Western Cape is not unique to all that we are facing, and international standards will help us to get our learners to the place where we are. So thank you very much again. I cannot say thank you enough for the presentation. There's a lot of questions, but I'm not going to go into all of them because I think it's a well-researched report, and the WCE will work with it, and we as a committee can study it and maybe have regular engagements with the department to see, you know, what's happening and going forward. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thanks, Member Christians. I'm just looking to see if there's another hand at this stage, but I don't see right now. And so I think I'll hand over to the team on the response there. You know, certainly I share Member Christian's concern on the ECD level, and how we're going to tackle and deal with that aspect. Certainly, and if I perhaps just paraphrase some of the issues here, there must be quite a long list of work streams and I suppose points that need to be covered in how one rolls out a program like this. And I would imagine this is something that the department now needs to think through fairly carefully, and how we deal with that given the fiscal constraints that we have and the budgetary needs that there will be to be able to implement a lot of the work there. So maybe you could include some of your initial thoughts there. Look, I'll hand over to you, Minister. I don't know if you want to make open remarks or closing remarks on the team there on the question.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll hand to the team for a response, and then I will come in as I usually do at the end.
Thank you very much, Minister. Chair, if I firstly let me acknowledge Member Christians, thank you very much for the 3 points that you've shared, the 3 points of reflections and the questions attached to them. And I acknowledge that there's, probably a broader range of questions and issues to engage that does relate. I mean, I do want to touch on each one of the 3 because they are engaging the team for both its administrative challenge, but also in terms of the longer-term priority planning that we need to do. And so, of course, if I start with the first one around the disparities immediately at the early learning level, at the grade R level, and of course, I've shared some statistical data around cognitive development and learning, emergent numeracy and literacy, but of course, those aren't in an index context. It's not the only things we look at as we think about children who are falling behind. We look, of course, at the gross and the fine motor skills. We look at some of the life skills aspects and acknowledge, as you say, Member Christians, that there are, of course, disparities that can be traced back to, as you say, not just the education learning outcomes, but also health and nutrition, and also social development. And so part of our thinking right now as we grapple as an education department with how might we serve and bring equity into that kind of conversation, it is about building an integrated service model that, as Liz points out earlier, is going to connect with the other departments of social development and health. We do need to think about how do we give our teachers we focused on at that foundation phase the best chance to make that group as homogeneous as possible. That's going to be very difficult, but I think we've started with the basics and comparing ourselves to other countries. We've looked at the environment, the class sizes, we looked at the safety aspects in that particular context, but we have work to do in terms of acknowledging that the child and the children that start at grade R will start at very different levels, and so designing early learning programs that meet that context, but also adjusting for the other inputs that we might have to bring to the table, notwithstanding the budgetary kind of dependency. We do have to think about how we bring nutrition particularly and other aspects of social development to the table. So that's a challenge statement that we will grappling with both in the near term as we take on and expand and universalize grade R services, but going forward as well for our longer term plan. On the question of violence and safety, it is characteristic of the Western Cape. We can't ignore that, and indeed to my commitment on behalf of the department to the committee is that in this research endeavour on the chapters on learning and teaching, Member Christians, as you point out, we have focused on the impact of violence on learning, and as Liz pointed out earlier, on the conditions, improving the conditions of work for teachers. We've used the research that we had access to, and we knew for, prior to this research that the Western Cape does have higher instances or incidences of physical and verbal bullying. And whilst lot of work has gone into that to address that. It's still a characteristic. The safety context is very much a key consideration. As I said, the terms test, for example, points out, and it's the statistics that you quote, Member Christian, that children who are not in what is considered and assessed to be a safe and orderly environment, they do perform on average relatively poorer than children who are in a safe and orderly environment. And so we're unpacking what safe and orderly means, not just for the learner, but of course for the teacher as well in the environmental aspects. But that is an affirmation that we are considering violence for its impact on learning, but also, of course, as an administrative issue. We do know there are in-school interventions that we can take care of in the classroom, in the school, but of course, getting the child to the gate is the point that you make. So the investments and the priority investments to, bring children safely to school, that is a foregrounded priority as we think about, once they are in the classroom and in the school, how would we engage and teach them? So it hand in hand is not a neat answer, except to acknowledge that the research is not neutral on it. It speaks very directly to doing more to assess in our context the relationship that violence and safety has to learning. We can't talk about improving learning outcomes without acknowledging the work we have to do there. And then I think on the last point around, teachers themselves, we spoke a little bit about the characteristic, the dividend around, the age profile of the teachers, the opportunities over the next while to really engage the teachers who are with us to really take on this challenge of improving learning. But it is a foreground priority that to improve the system, we do have to create a better working environment for our teachers and do what we can to motivate, and as Liz points out, tap into intrinsic motivation of teachers to get them to stay. We do acknowledge that our system benefits from having really strong teachers in the Western Cape. It's premature to talk about a change strategy for teachers in the Western Cape. We believe our system strength is built on it. And so across this paper, what I mean to illuminate is that in this instructional core of the relationship between student, teacher, and curriculum, actually the research has intensified and the proactive engagements of what can we do at scale that might work, that's centered on the teacher. And the environment of the teacher, as Liz points out, is right up there with enhancing the teacher's teaching capacity and effectiveness. So those are statements of intent. I hope it comes across that way, Chair, that of course we acknowledge that the characteristics and the features of the system is something we need to grapple with. We can't say that we are going to continue promoting excellence and equity without being more specific around what more do we think we are going to do. And I think by way of conclusion on my side, Chair, is, the World Bank has pointed out, one of the strengths that it had encountered in this being a consultative process is that there's broad acknowledgement that we can do more and can do better, notwithstanding the progress we've made. But I think that is quite a humbling statement to hear that, there's broad acknowledgement that we can do more, and we will set ourselves that challenge to do more and set ourselves some goals in that respect. Thank you, Chair.
Ali, may I add? Is that okay, Chair? Can I just...
Yes, you can go ahead, Liz.
Thank you so much, and thank you for those comments. I think Sally's covered it really well. I just wanted to mention one thing about what Member Christian said about, kids coming in with differing ability levels, different contexts, and how do we make sure that everybody actually starts on an even keel. And one of the things is that we have assessments in South Africa that measures where kids need to be at a minimum level, right? So the issue is that we're not hitting that minimum level. The statistic is in South Africa overall that it's close to 81% of students can't read for meaning at age 10, right? So if that's the issue, then that's not reaching a minimum. And I just wanted to share, if I may, this is very quick, This is a presentation from the Department of Basic Education. I'm just going to share one screen around benchmarks. And if you can see the screen, this basically shows the minimum oral reading fluency in English as first language. So basically it's saying that at the end of grade 2, kids should be reading 30 words per minute. At the end of grade 3, 50 words per minute. At the end of grade 4, 70, and so on. And then they even have it, this is the great part of the work that's been done in South Africa, which I really think is a pioneer on a lot of this work. They even have it for Nguni home languages, right? So in grade 1, kids should know their letter sounds well, at least 40 correct letters per minute. And then it goes to how many words they should be reading correctly per minute. So we have these minimum benchmarks that can be used in the classroom and that everybody should know, right? So I have a kid who goes to school. Do I know what they need to learn by the end of grade 2, at the end of grade 3? And how can we all rally around that, right? It's not to say that there's going to be performers that are going to be way above that, right? And we need to support them too. We need to make sure that there's personalized learning to ensure that everybody who's getting to the higher levels of learning, that they're supported to push the bar. But what we need to ensure, as you were saying, Member Christians, is to make sure that everybody reaches that minimum. And again, I think that there's there's enough tools and benchmarks that have been created just for the South African context and have been tested. So I wanted to mention that. You know, part of it is if you have a classroom where 60% of your kids aren't reaching your minimum benchmark, then you kind of have to do the lesson again. You need to start from the basics, right? But if you have only 10% of kids that aren't reaching the minimum, then you can sort of do more remedial targeted programs towards them, maybe direct your teaching assistants towards them to support them, to give them extra time. So what happens in the classroom in terms of meeting these minimum benchmarks determines the actions that a teacher takes in terms of how they ensure that everybody reaches the minimum. And there is a real science to reading, and that's something that teachers also need to know, is the science behind getting kids to read. And I'm so sorry to hear about the student who was killed. I mean, it's just horrific, you know, the whole thought of it. And I come to the point about teachers, you know, experiencing that in your class and other students and experiencing that. What does that do to your motivation to be at school? I mean, that's horrifying, and it's something that I think we need to address. One thing I heard about Western Cape is that you have this boots on the ground program, which I understood is a very dedicated way to find out where different spots of crime are happening and direct police and other security to support in those areas. I don't know whether that's an option, but certainly it's going to affect teachers and students' motivation to be in class. One thing I did want to mention, another part of it is on teachers in terms of motivation. I didn't talk about it in this presentation, but we do find that compared to other professions that require similar education and qualifications, teachers are quite well paid in South Africa. And I don't think that's widely known in terms of getting people to, you know, good students who have come out of the system to join the teacher workforce. I think that's something that we need to leverage a little bit more. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz and Sali. I mean, perhaps in closing, I do want to thank the Honourable Christians for his compliments, obviously, in relation to the report, but also to say that I'm delighted that he picked up on the story of Sobral, which I think is significant for me, but I think should also be very significant for the committee, because I think what the story of Sobral illustrates is that we can improve literacy rates amongst our foundation phase learners, even in a context where there is severe inequality, like Brazil and South Africa. And so it can be done, which I think is a very important lesson from the case of Sobral. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Minister, and both Liz and Sali for your comments there. I'm not sure if there are any further questions or any further hands. I haven't seen up to now. So I think we that is effectively, I think, summed up the comments and from both committee side and from yourselves on this briefing. So certainly I would like to once again thank you for bringing this briefing to the committee and giving us the broad rundown on this whole process and the work that has been done by the World Bank. I have no doubt that the committee will continue to engage and discuss the work that has been done in this report, and also then take that further in its deliberations in time to come. So I think at this stage I would like to thank you and then release you to get back to your other duties for the day. So thank you very much for that. And then the committee members can then stay on and we can then discuss resolutions and so forth on the way going forward. So thank you very much to you for being with us and giving your time to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Sali, and thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. I think the team has effectively left there. So I think we can now continue with the rest of our deliberations and just consider any comments that we want to make and recommendations, resolutions to take from the discussion that we've had today. Certainly one would like to see how we can support the department in the implementation of the recommendations that come out of this report. And no doubt what we need to tackle here is a fairly huge task in terms of the work that needs to be done. But, I think we all appreciate that we are not likely to find solutions in the next 6 months or the next year. This is a fairly long-term process that we are undertaking. I don't know, any comments from committee at this stage? See any great comments coming from committee. I'm just looking at Ms. Hasamusa on the other aspects of the agenda that we just need to deal with today. And then probably it's a matter of formulating a resolution coming out of what we've done here.
Chair, may I?
You may go ahead.
Chair, the only thing on the agenda is now the resolutions. We've amended the notice which was sent out this morning after programming set. Those minutes will be adopted on the 29th as agreed. Chair.
Yes, no, that's fine. I think we can adopt those minutes at that stage. I think what and I'm just looking at other members here too on the resolutions that we can take here. And I think we would be highly supportive of the work that happens, and would need to commend both the department and the World Bank in undertaking this analysis of education and the report that they produced, and would like to encourage the department to develop the type of initiatives that they would propose to implement both in the shorter term and in the longer term, and also then to motivate the impact that this would then have both on the budget and the operational aspects of the department. I see Honourable Christian's hand.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe just one from my side. I think the question that I ask is, you know, I am very concerned. I think, you know, the ECDs, you know, getting children on the same level, on the same baseline before they even enter into grade R. So if the department can maybe tell us, you know, what are they doing? Because we know there's huge gaps between children when they get to ECDs and when they get to grade R. And that's why we have a problem of numeracy and literacy because of that backlog. So if the department can maybe tell us, you know, and I think Ms. Nenan, if I say it correctly, she also said, you know, the basic education has children at a certain stage must read 30 words per minute, and so on and so on. So I'm just looking at to get the base, the foundation in order to get our system, you know, better when children, then our pass rate will be better if we have the basis right. So maybe something in that line, if we can look at what they're doing at ECDs to make sure that children at least do the basics, and children come with a backlog, and also, you know, the measures. Children need to read X, need to understand Y, and that process. So I'm just speaking about the, you know, the basis of children being on the same level if they leave early childhood development before they get into grade R. Thank you, Chair.
So, you know, I agree with you there, Member Christian. I think the whole issue of the ECD aspect and preparing a child for the learning phase is a very it's a transversal area that a number of the other departments need to be working side by side with education, and I'm thinking here both on the health side and on the social development side. So it's quite a comprehensive amount of work that would need to go into improving those prospects of the young children coming into the system. And I think that we should then encourage the department to explore into the work that needs to be done on how we're going to support and build that system, because I think it is a you know, quite a complex amount of work that would need to be taken to make sure that those benchmarks that already exist are in fact being implemented and being monitored. You know, I think just simply looking at ECDs and to make sure that those ECDs are, you know, there's almost a work program that needs to be set out for ECDs in terms of the type of framework and what the type of objectives that they need to be meeting, and some way in which that then gets monitored on and evaluated on an ongoing basis. So I think we could probably build that into an overall resolution that we're creating. You know, the next area that they do certainly talk about is improving the teacher effectiveness within the classroom, and we need to then be building and creating the whole next generation of teachers as well, and how they are able to deal with these challenges of the reading and the literacy and the maths abilities, where we are seeing the very broad spread of performances among learners, and how that type of support gets put together for teachers. I think that is one aspect. We've already dealt with and discussed the whole area of greater innovation that would be required in terms of the reforms from how do we get more schools in place? How do we get the private sector involved in education? So that needs to be carried forward, and I think we probably also, they touched on the whole aspect of data and how best we gather data and start to interpret that data. So it's an all-encompassing exercise that needs to be undertaken. And I suppose what we should then request the department is to sort of start unpacking and prioritizing some of these objectives into more bite-sized chunks that can be dealt with in time to come. I don't know if that is got some form of broad acceptance from committee.
That's fine, Chairperson. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if there are any other comments from members.
Chairperson is me, Member Boyson. I also support.
Thank you, Member Boyson. I think if that, I'm just looking at Ms. Hassan Musa, if that we've sort of captured that, and we can work from that in developing that set of resolutions.
Sure, Chair. I will structure it and draft it in the minutes and circulate it to the members.
Okay. I think, yes, look, I think that has been a very worthwhile session certainly for me, and in gaining a better understanding of the work that has been done for the WCED by the World Bank, and certainly something that we would then need to pick up on a periodic basis and discuss with the department. So I want to thank you for your attendance today, and I think that brings our meeting then to a conclusion, and I just would like to wish you a very pleasant afternoon and evening too, and we can accordingly then adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank